I'm sitting here preparing for my Good Friday video, and oh, these are some tough passages. These are some tough passages. Oh, these are tough. Part of me knows that this is maybe dumbed down in a sense of how horrific the beating, crucifixion, this Roman torture device. I just can't help but think that should be my punishment for the sins I've done. Hmm. Well, let's see if we can put this video together, huh? Hey everyone, Bible Nerd here. Thanks for joining me on this Holy Week study, and we've made it to what's known as Good Friday. And many people will say it's anything but good that happened on this particular day. But the reason that moniker is out there and why we call it Good Friday is even all these evil things that were meant for evil, meant for destruction, God turns into good. The beauty for ashes is on full display on this story of how our Lord and Savior was persecuted, broken for our sakes, put on the cross, and buried this day. So, Good Friday is what we're going to review some of the scriptures that are in the Bible that relate to this story. And let's start in the book of Matthew. So, if you have your Bibles, please grab them. Let's open up the Bible and actually read what it says during these events and really take to heart the events that happened so long ago on our behalf and for us. So, let's read through that. Let's go to Matthew 27. Matthew and Mark's versions. Let's first talk about how he is turned over to Pilate. Pilate was the Roman governor that was basically in charge of the law of that area, and he was somebody that was involved in this decision of whether to crucify Jesus or let him go. So there's really interesting stories that his interaction with Jesus. In Matthew and Mark, it's a little bit shorter. So let's start there. So we have Matthew chapter 27, starting in the 11th verse. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he is being accused by the chief priests and the elders, he answered nothing. But then Pilate asked him, "Do you not hear how many things they're testifying against you?" But he answered him not a word. So the governor marveled greatly. So you can see he's standing there, and the chief priests are probably making all kinds of accusations about what he's done with the temple or blaspheme or all this stuff. And Jesus is just standing there. So the governor kind of asks him directly, "Do you not hear what they're saying against you? Have nothing to say?" And he says nothing. Let's go to the account in Mark. So let's go to Mark chapter 15. Same thing. It's a little bit of a shorter passage in these two gospels. 15, starting in the first verse. Immediately in the morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and delivered him to Pilate. Then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him and said, "It is as you say." And the chief priests accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. Then Pilate asked him again, saying, "Do you answer nothing? See how many things they testify against you." But Jesus still answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled. So those are the two short accounts in Matthew and Mark. Now let's jump over to John. So join me in the book of John. Let's go to the 18th. Yep, let's go to the 18th chapter, starting in the 28th verse. So John 18:28. This dives a little more into the dialogue that Jesus and Pilate have. So let's go into this. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the Praetorium, and it was early morning. But they themselves did not enter in, lest they be defiled, that they might not be able to eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him and said, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not deliver him up to you." Then Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." A quick clarification on that. the lawfulness of putting somebody to death isn't against like the law of Moses. It was that the Roman governors, obviously, they were the ones in control. They're the only ones that can institute capital punishment. So this probably has Pilate go, wait a minute, this is you're bringing this guy to put him to death. This isn't just some evildoer, blasphemer, some religious law. You're actually saying that this guy is worthy of death. So let's continue to read. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your whole nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, You are a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Whoever, everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And then he said this, he went away again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him." So I think that's you can see that how this kind of elevates. So basically, they bring him. There's already a lot of tension in Jerusalem at this time. You got a lot of Jews that have come in to celebrate Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So tensions with the Romans are already probably a little bit higher. Then all of a sudden, they bring this guy, and he's probably thinking, okay, they want me to arrest him or do something, but they're basically saying, hey, we can't put him to death. And there's like, to death? What has he done? What has elevated this guy to this particular point? So he starts to interview him and have these questions and dialogues to the point where I don't find fault in him. Not definitely not deserving of any kind of death. So that's I love that the conversation back and forth there. So now let's also jump over to Luke. I want to read the account according to Luke. So we're going to now jump over to the 23rd verse in Luke. So I'll give you a second to catch up there. So John's ahead of Luke, so you just go back to Luke. So let's go to Luke chapter 23. Then the whole multitude of them arose and led them to Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him and said, "It is as you say." So Pilate said to the chief priests and crowd, "I find no fault in this man." But they were the more fierce, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judah, beginning from Galilee to this place." Here's an interesting little nuance that's not in the other gospels. This basically gives Pilate a chance to say, "Wait a minute, Galilee, that's a different district, that's a different area. Send him over to that guy." That's let him kind of decide what to do with this Jesus fellow, because I don't find any fault in him. There's a bunch of times he says, definitely not enough to put him to death. So the fault idea is not just he's never done any wrong. It's also the idea that not anything deserving of death with what you're accusing him of. So send him over to Herod. So it's kind of like, let's send him over to Herod. So this is the only account that we have of this interaction. So let's continue reading in Luke. Then Pilate heard of Galilee. He asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard of the many things about him, and he hoped to see a miracle done by him. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes stood and vividly accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arranged for him a glorious robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had enmity with each other. So that's a little nuance that's added that we don't get in the other stories. So now, after those interactions with Pilate, there is now an interactions with Pilate and more the crowd, and we have this character introduced known as Barabbas. Now, Barabbas is a murderer. He was part of another uprising, another revolt. So the Roman people or the Roman soldiers had captured him, and most likely, there's a lot of indication, I think, here that the two other people that were crucified next to Jesus might have been with Barabbas. Barabbas might have been the one that was right there in the middle, that was supposed to be in the middle where Jesus took his place, but the other two were probably also people that were thieves or murderers that were part of this rebellion, and the Romans want to make an example out of them. So Barabbas is definitely deserving of what's about to happen, and this is a very interesting reading here of what happened with this character and how they wanted to switch places. So let's continue now that we're in Luke. Let me just check my notes real quick. I want to make sure I'm doing this in the right order. Yeah, let's stay with Luke. All right. So starting, we're still in Luke 23, starting in the 13th verse. Then Pilate, when he called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I find no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. Nor neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for it is necessary for him to release one of them at the feast." And they cried out at once, saying, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who has been thrown into prison for certain rebellion made in the city and for murder." Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again cried out to them. But they shouted, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Whew. Wow. Then he said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has he done? I find no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go." But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of those men and the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. And he released to them the one they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison, but he delivered Jesus into their wills. Wow. Just just crazy. All right, let's go over to keep our place right there. So kind of maybe try to keep our place there in Luke. We're going to come back to that in a second. Yeah. All right, we're going to go back now to I want to go to Matthew. There's a interesting detail here that I want to read through the same passage or the same interaction, but there's little nuances here that I think you're familiar with when it comes to the story. And I want to make sure I've got it in here in the right spot. Yes, okay. Here we go. So let's go to Matthew, back towards the front of the New Testament. Matthew chapter 27, starting in the 15th verse. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner named Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For they knew they handed him over because of their envy. While he was sitting in the judgment seat, his wife said to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with this man. I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said to them, "Which of these two do you want me to release?" They said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." Then the governor said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they cried out even the more, "Let him be crucified." Then Pilate said that he would not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising. He took water, washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this person. You see to it." And all the people answered and said, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then they released Barabbas to them, and then he was scourged, delivered to be crucified. Man. Oh. So we get that story of him washing his hands to just say, "I wash my hands of this situation. This man has not done evil in my sight. He has not done evil worthy of any kind of this kind of death." And yet the people demanded it so much, switched places with someone that deserved to be dead. And he gave in to their will and said, "Okay." Man. Okay, so let's go back to John. Go back to John now. Let's read this passage in John. Then Jesus came out. Oh, so I want to talk a little. There's a little bit of a nuance here with John that I find is interesting. So you see, it mentioned a few times that there was this idea that he would be or be cleansed. There would be times where he would go out and do certain things to be able to see if he would give in to wanting mercy or to be able to not be crucified by giving in and agreeing with the stuff that had happened. So the scourging that would happen before a lot of times would break people that needed to atone for what they were doing or to give into what the government was trying to do and admit their sin and that they were rebelled and that they were deserving the punishment to the point where they would then not do the crucifixion. So he does this cleansing, if you will, and that's where we have this story in John that's a little bit different order. So let's go back to John. We're going to go to John 19, or excuse me, 18. We're going to finish chapter 18, starting in the 39th verse. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the king of the Jews? They all cried out, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a robber. Then it goes on in chapter 19. So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And they put on him a purple robe. And they said, Hail, King of the Jews. And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out and said to them, Behold, I'm bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. So the scourging was kind of a way to be able to break the person that was in trouble, the prisoner, that type of thing was to be able basically have that be enough punishment. Scourging was a horrible practice. I mean, they beat you within an inch of your life. There's lashes, there's just incredible amount of beating as they're just to be able to break that person's will as much as they can. In this story, the scourging happens then right to the crucifixion. In John, you've got the scourging, and then he's presented back to the people to see what their response is. So the order's a little bit different in John. But let's continue to read what happens once he brings him out after the scourging. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe, and Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Boy, I can't imagine. Yeah, he's beaten, his face is busted up, his he's I mean, the people in the crowd had to just gasp. I mean, it would be human. It'd be natural just to go, wow, but that's not what we read. Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. After all that beating, the scourging, they still didn't have enough. Wow. Pilate said to them, You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jewish answered him, We have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was more afraid, and went again into the praetorium and said to Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to them, Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you? Jesus said, You could have no power at all against me, unless it was given to you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Moreover, makes himself a king, speaks against whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. And Pilate therefore heard the saying. He brought Jesus out and sat him on the judgment seat in the place that is called the pavement, but in Hebrew, and I'm going to mess these Hebrew names up, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, Shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Wow, what an ultimate betrayal of God. We have no king but Caesar. Even if they didn't believe, Even if they didn't believe that Jesus was God, "We have no king but Caesar," is a slap in Yahweh's face. Then he delivered him out to be crucified. Then they took Jesus and led him away. So a little different timing in John with some of the other events of the soldiers mocking him. So these are, oh man, these are some tough passages. And it's not even over yet. This whole thing isn't even over yet. Okay, let's go. That's John. In Luke, I wrote down notes here. There's no soldiers. There's only this mention of examining him, which would have been putting him to the test and say, okay, you really think you're these things? Let's put you under some incredible stress, beat you to get you to say against yourself, like testify against yourself. And obviously, he never does. He never finds any fault in him after even that scourging. So I think that's what you hear in Luke. Let's go over to Mark and Matthew have very similar passages. So let's go back to Mark this time. And let's see what the book of Mark insight gives us on this entire thing. Okay. So in the book of Mark, chapter 15, starting in the 16th verse. Then the soldiers led him away into the hall called the Praetorium, and they called together the whole garrison. And they clothed him with with purple, and they twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" I mean, the Roman people did not look highly on the Jewish people. They looked down on them like they're rats or dogs. So this idea of them, "Hail, King of the Jews," and had the chance to strike him, and there's some that probably just absolutely reveled in this idea of being able to just beat up Jesus, this self-proclaimed, this person accused of being the king of the Jews. Yeah, I mean, golly, the whole garrison. "Hail, King of the Jews." Then they struck him on the head with a reed and spat on him, and bowing the knee, they worshipped him. And when they had mocked him, they put the purple off him, put his own clothes back on him, and led him out to be crucified. Okay. These were professional killers, the Roman soldiers. And I saw a bunch of studies that the people that were assigned these crucifixions or these garrisons were almost too brutal for the battlefield. That's why they saved him for this. They were just so bloodthirsty and just reveled in just beating up these Jewish or wherever they were at within the Roman world. So they just reveled in it. Oh, humans can be so horrible. Okay. So now Jesus is taken to be crucified. He's beaten within an inch of his life and forced to carry his cross, which was a common way of putting them through as much torture as possible. So we get the account. Let's stay here in Mark. We get this mention of a guy named Simon that helped Jesus as he's lost blood. He hasn't slept. He went through the Garden of Gethsemane. He's gone through these mock trials. He's been spat on and beat on by his own people and then by the Romans. And now, under the weight of that cross, he can't carry it up by himself. So Simon helps him to get his cross up to a place known Golgotha, and that's one of the few Hebrew words you will see in your Bibles, which is translated as the place of the skull. I've seen some photos of this, and there's almost a look of a skull in the rocks. Like the rocks have a look to where it looks like a skull. That's been changed over the years and as people have visited these places, or it could have been also just a name referencing how many people had died in that area, and there's just the bones that were there. But the place of the skull is where he's taken. So let's keep reading in Mark chapter 15, verse 23. Then they gave him some wine mingled with myrrh to drink, but he did not take it. And when they crucified him, they divided up his garments, casting lots for them to determine what every man should take. Now it was the third hour, and they crucified him, and the inscription of the accusation was written above, "The King of the Jews." With him they also crucified two robbers, one on his right, one on his left. Most likely, these were the people that were with Barabbas that were arrested during that rebellion. There's a good chance that these were part of his group because Barabbas is the one that they were going to release. So that's not specifically written in here, but I've seen a lot of commentary. It's likely that these guys were the three that were supposed to be made examples of to the people of what you do if you rebel against Rome. If you rebel against Rome, this can be your fate. With him was crucified two robbers, one on his right, one on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled, which says, "And he will be numbered with the transgressors." And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ah, you who will destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also mocking amongst themselves with the scribes, saying, "He saved others. Himself he cannot save. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Even those that were crucified with him reviled him. So that's the account in Mark. Let's go to Matthew. This is while he's on the cross. Matthew 27, starting in the 45th verse. Or sorry, that's when he passed away. Let's back here. Starting in the 32nd verse. So Matthew 27. And now had come, they found a man named Simon, who they compelled to bear his cross. So again, Jesus is going up to the hill here carrying his cross. He was not able to carry it, dropped it several times, assuredly. And they have this guy that's basically passing by, Simon, help him to get this man and the cross up to the hill. And when they had come to the place called Golgotha, that is called the place of the skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink. But when he had tasted it, he would not drink. They then crucified him, divided up his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they kept watch over him there, and they put up over his head the accusation written against him: "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Then two robbers were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, You who destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also mocking him, and the scribes and elders, saying, "He saved others. He himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God." Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. Very similar passage to Mark. Now, let's go to the accounts that have a little bit more dialect of what Jesus says while he is going through this horrendous torture of the crucifixion. I don't want to be crazy graphic, but you have to understand what was going through, and then the pain he was going through. He was just scourged. His back is completely torn up, shredded to pieces by the whips and the stuff that they were hitting him during the scourging. And now he's forced on this wooden cross full of splinters, and the only way he can breathe is having to lift himself up onto this and scratching his back. And it's just, yeah. Wow. Okay. Luke chapter 23. So let's go to Luke chapter 23. This is some dialect that he has while he's on the cross. "Now, as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And the multitude of people followed him, and the women also mourning and lamenting over him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren, wombs that were never born, and breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and the hills cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what would be done in the dry? There were also two other criminals led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place, and when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right, one on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they divided his garments and cast lots, and the people stood looking on. But even the rulers with them sneered, saying, he saves others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen of God. He could have done it. He could have stopped this whole thing. And yet he didn't for us. He didn't for me. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up. Wow. The soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. And the inscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. This is the king of the Jews. Then one of the criminals who was hanging blasphemed him, saying, if you are the Christ, save yourself and us. But the other, answering, rebuking him, saying, do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, assuredly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Man, this is a lot tougher than I thought it would be. I knew it was going to be tough, but because there's so many times we'll maybe read just one gospel, but going through all of them at the same time is wow. A lot of emotions. All right. Let's go to John chapter 19. Let's see what it says here. Chapter 19, starting in the 17th verse. And he, bearing his cross, went out to the place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him and two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Then Pilate wrote on the tile and put on the cross, it was written, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Then many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Therefore, the chief priests and the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, do not write King of the Jews, but he said, I am the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified him, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top in one piece. They said therefore among themselves, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whom's it shall be, that the scripture may be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothes they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did this thing. Now there stood on the cross of Jesus his mother. There stood by the cross. Now stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things are now accomplished, that the scriptures might be fulfilled, said, I'm thirsty. Now a vessel full of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine and put it to his mouth. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. Hmm. Boy, I just any time you could have stopped this. Any time you could have stopped this. But he didn't. Okay. All right. So he is now passed away. Let's read the accounts. Let's read the accounts here. Okay. Let's go back to Matthew 27. Now, from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, Lama. You're going to have to read that. I'm not very good with the Hebrew words, but that translates into, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those who stood by, when he heard that, said, This man is calling for Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and offered him to drink. The rest said, Let him alone. See if Elijah will come to save him. I want to back up here a little bit here. It says, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's a psalm that ties into that, and just this lamentation of just complete, just giving it all up, just giving it all up. But the reaction of the Israelites is what I'm always most intrigued about, what they would respond to when he said that. And what do they first say? He's crying for Elijah. So I think that that's what that connotation meant a lot more than him saying, God, where are you? Now, that's still part of it, because at this moment you have to feel that almost even God couldn't bear to watch his son just suffering on this device. Then maybe he did for a moment feel like he was completely alone up there. But I think the reaction of the Jews that were around and the people that stood there, that reaction is also very telling of what that phrase would have meant to them. So there may be some insight there, but what a painful moment that he's going through right here, to the point where every breath it kills you in a crucifixion. Every time you have to take a breath with your back completely destroyed, you have to pull yourself up and just tear and man, it is a horrific torture device. The rest said, Let him alone and see if Elijah will come and save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were slipped, and the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Let's go to That's Matthew. Let's go to Mark. There's some stuff in Mark too that's really amazing. So we're going to Mark chapter 15, starting in the 33rd verse. Now, when the 6th hour had come, there was a darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And in the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those who stood by, when they heard that, said, Look, he is calling for Elijah. Then someone ran and filled a sponge full of sour wine and put it on a reed and offered it to him to drink, saying, Let him alone. Let's see if Elijah will come and take him down. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and breathed his last. Then the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So when the centurion who stood opposite him saw that, cried out like this and breathed his last, he said, Truly this man was the Son of God. Man, man. Oh, wow, man, I tell you, what a powerful story. The passion that Jesus had for us to go through this. What good could come of it? Well, let's find out. Thank you for joining me on this video. And I believe this is true. I know this happened. And I mean, it really is. I don't know if I've ever gone through it like this before. Going to each account and just reading each one. You just stay in it longer, you just, well, I don't know what else to say. Let's leave it at that. Um, God bless you. Hope you take this day to really think about the events that happen and know that joy is coming. Hope you have a wonderful day and God bless.